And this sweet yellow bird is inspired by the American goldfinch. In this video, I'm going to stitch this from start to finish. And in particular today, I'm talking about color. I'm going to show how I approach this piece in terms of color choices, color schemes. I'm going to bring in the color wheel, and I'm going to talk your ear off about color. So join me as I stitch this sweet little bird from start to finish. Let's get started. I'm starting with a simple collage that I've secured with some applique pins. So I have a piece of dyed fabric. This is a piece of vintage fabric I've been using in pieces for years now. And then these are two newer pieces of printed fabric. They're secured onto a piece of felt, and my background fabric is a very thin cotton lawn. And it's a little bigger on all sides than my piece of felt. So looking at these colors for my collage, I've picked out some embroidery floss, starting with this light green color and a turquoise color that I think goes with all of these different shades. And this same color, a little bit lighter, and then the same color a little bit darker. Then I've chosen this bright turquoise blue that matches the dyed fabric. And then looking at this piece, I've picked out a bird template from my 6 bird set. And I think that that fits really nicely in that spot. Then I pulled out a piece of thin yellow cotton, and I thought maybe the bird could be yellow. So I thought about a goldfinch, and I wanted to make a bird that was inspired by the goldfinches I've seen occasionally at my feeder. So with the goldfinch colors, I picked some floss. This yellow goes with the color of the fabric. I picked a lighter pale yellow, this sort of golden brown color, and this sort of gray brown color. And those can make up the stitching that I do on the bird. So the first thing I'm going to do, put these out of the way for now, and I'm going to baste these pieces down. I want to get rid of these pins as quickly as I can. Just using regular sewing thread in white, and I'm going to take small little stitches on the front and bigger stitches on the back. So now my collage pieces are attached with the big stitches on the back and small stitches on the front that you can barely see. Now I'm going to move to the bird. So I've taken my bird shape and traced it onto 2 pieces of freezer paper. I haven't traced the legs. I've left the legs off, and I can just connect those with my pen. And I've traced it onto the paper side, not the shiny side. And then the shiny side is what I'm going to place against the fabric to iron it on. One of them I'm going to iron onto this piece of thin black. The other one I'm going to iron onto this piece of thin yellow. Then after I iron them, I'm going to cut them out. So now all I have to do is peel off the freezer paper. Sometimes you can reuse these a few times, so I'll save this. So I'm going to place the black one underneath, the yellow one on top, and bring back my collage and decide how I want to place this. Because nothing's stitched down, I can also flip it over and I could place it the other way. Because this fabric is the same on both sides, I have that option. So it can go this way if I wanted to. But I think I want mine to go this way. If I had just used the one layer, that would be fine too. It would be quite a bit more see-through, so I would have to make allowances for that. But I want to use 2 here. It's very thin, so it's not going to make it harder to stitch through. And I'm going to be able to do some creative things with my bird because it has 2 layers. So the goldfinch has some black on its head and on its wing. So I'm going to be able to reveal this black. So the first thing I'm going to do is stitch down this bird, and I'm going to baste it in place. And I'm aware of the areas where I want to reveal the black, which are sort of the lower part of where the wing is and the tail, and the top part of the head. So I'm going to baste to leave those areas free. I'm going to use 1 strand of embroidery floss in this pale yellow color. I'm just holding the bird in place. This is my chance to make sure that I have the bird exactly where I want it to be. And I will hold the bird on with my thumb. I have the option of taking these stitches out later if I feel like they're interfering with my stitching design, or I can leave them in. So I've taken my heat erasable pen and sort of roughly drawn in the areas that are going to be black, and those are areas that I haven't stitched. So now I can come in with my scissors and carefully remove the yellow layer. And it's okay if my stitches are a little bit ragged. It's going to be covered up with stitching. And then the top layer, the yellow layer, same on the head. That's my eye. I've still got a few little marks here from my heat erasable pen, so I can just hit that with heat. That's going to make the eye disappear. So I could stitch my eye before I hit it with the heat. That might be a good idea. I'm taking a few stitches with this black, 2 strands, right into the black before I hop over and create my eye. So there's the placement of my eye. I'm going to add more stitching to it to really define it later, but I've got it placed now. So now I'm going to attach this black part with black thread. So once I've done this, the black will be attached. This yellow is already attached. So my bird will be completely in place. I've stitched her little beak in this golden brown color, and I'm going to use the same color to create the feet. Just marked roughly there where I want them to be with my heat erasable pen. I'm just going to make a few little stitches here. So before I start adding my dark colors and my yellows, I'm adding this palest yellow color that I have and just adding some lines. And then that'll help inform the other stitching that I'm doing. And if I decide that I need to, then I can come back and add some more of this after. But this kind of gets me started with my dark colors and my light colors. I'm just taking straight stitches, trying to make them look a little feathery. I'm paying attention to the direction, I'm trying to keep them angled, sort of along the same alignment as the back of the bird. And if you're stitching a bird, or any animal really, if you have a photo reference, that can really help. I haven't trimmed off these little edges yet. They're starting to kind of flap around and get in the way, so I think the next thing I will do when I finish stitching this pale yellow here is I'm just going to snip off the edges. So that's looking good. I'm going to cut these right at the edge so it matches where the edge of this is. I'm going to do a little bit more stitching on the bird before I move to the background. So I'm adding tiny little stitches, giving a kind of a feathery look to the bird. I'm just going to continue that and fill this whole area in. So that's going to take some time. So I'm just going to go slow and enjoy the process until all of this is filled in. So I finished stitching this body in the yellow. It actually took quite a while. And now I'm going to move on to the darker parts. And I'm going to use a combination of black and that dark grayish brown color, just to give it a little bit of depth and texture. And after I fill that in, I'm going to start working on the background. So sometimes when I stitch, I try to make sure that I stitch some on the bird and then the background, and I move back and forth to prevent sort of a pulling in that can happen. But in this case, I'm stitching lightly and there's not as much pulling in happening. So I'm just going to continue working on the bird. So I've added gray-brown color where the black is, and I like the way that that's looking up against the black. And then I've made a bit of a start on working on the claws here. Not finished yet. I'm just going to extend those a little bit. Then I'm going to be ready to work on the background and really focus on blending the background with this sweet goldfinch. Before I start stitching in the background, I want to take a moment to talk about color. I've had some comments and some questions about my use of color and how I make my choices. And I want to say that there are some really simple, easy ways to think about color, to break it down and make it easier for you. And the first thing that I'm going to recommend is a color wheel. So this is a small, inexpensive color wheel. These are available in painting stores and maybe even in some craft stores and online. And one of the things that's really helpful on this side is it has a little chart that talks about complementary colors and different types of color combinations, you know, monochromatic and analogous, and there's lots of words that you don't necessarily, unless you're interested, have to delve into. But what I'm doing here when I look at this piece is I'm using colors that are all beside each other on the color wheel. Now this is something that I just instinctively did, but that's because I've spent a lot of time thinking about and studying color. It was probably in 2008, so about 15 years ago, that I really started getting interested in color and thinking about it and studying about it. I took a course on it and I've read books about it, and you know, even small books like this I found really helpful, where this is for painting, but it's very informative for thinking about color, where it starts with a color and you're adding different colors to it, and it's showing how it will change depending on how much of the colors that you add to it. So color is something that if you are really interested in it, you can delve really deep and get into lots of detail. And to me, it's fascinating, and I've really spent a lot of time thinking about it, but you don't have to. So something very simple like a color wheel can help you. If you have one color that you know you're starting with, in this case, I could either be starting with my background colors or my bird color, and you can decide what kind of a color scheme you want. And a color scheme with colors that are close together beside each other on a color wheel is a really good place to start if you're unsure, and also beautiful. I chose this because I like this combination. And so this will, if you turn it, it'll give you ideas where if I start with yellow as my base color, I could have gone in this direction and used more oranges and reds. And when I look at what I've done here, is this is the combination I've gone with. Yellow-orange, I have a tiny bit here in the beak and in the claws. Yellow's my main color, and you can see I have these other colors, especially when you look at the colors that I've chosen for my floss. So here's the yellow and the yellow orange that I chose. And then I've also chosen this paler yellow. And when you start looking at these colors, I had chosen a yellow green. And then I've gone into these blue-green colors here and a dark green. So the only color that's not really shown here is this turquoise blue, which if I continue to turn in this direction, blue is the next color. So when I'm looking at what I've done so far and excluding the blue and just including this yellow orange, what that will tell me is that when I do stitching in the background, maybe I should not use this at all or use it sparingly and focus on these colors. And I can look to this color wheel and even see some more colors that I could bring in, this sort of yellow orangey brown if I wanted to get sort of a darker shade of this, and olive colors, and all the options are here. So this is a really good way to figure out what colors you want to use. If you know one color, then you can just start moving this around and pick something that you like. Because I even could have gone as far as the reds and orange, and it would have been really gorgeous. I could have started with just the yellow and not had the orange and included the blue. It's just a really nice guideline and a place to start. So I recommend picking up one of these. They're not expensive, and I have mine beside me all the time, and I refer to it when I get stuck thinking about, when I'm looking at the piece and I'm thinking it needs something, it needs something. I grab my color wheel and then I think about, well, maybe I want a color that's opposite on the color wheel. So if I wanted something that was opposite the yellow, it could be one of these violet shades. And that would make everything pop if you pick colors that are opposite. So there's lots of things to, ways to go and things to do in just using one of these color wheels. And now I'm going to move on to stitching in the background. I'm going to start with this color, and I'm going to use this color on the bottom here to stitch down this patch of fabric, and then I'm going to go on from there and see if I want to use it in some other places. So I'm using 2 strands of embroidery floss, which is what I'm going to do throughout this project. It's what I almost always do with stitching. I find it's a nice thickness and I can get all the marks I want with 2 strands. And the other thing that I've done just before I started stitching was I removed the basting stitches. And that's because there's a tiny bit of sort of a ripple, and I don't need them anymore. The bird's kind of holding everything down, except maybe this piece just at the corner. But I took out the basting stitches at the bottom. I've snipped in the back where the basting stitches are. It's kind of hard to see, but I just snip in those long stitches. And so as I get to the top, I'll be able to use the back of my needle and pull them out. And this one's come out completely. And it just allows me to adjust the fabric and get it to lie flat. So I've stitched along here. I'm going to turn and go back in between the stitches I made. And the reason that I do this when I stitch is it's easier for me to take this larger, wider stitch as I go along than to put stitches really close together. So it's more comfortable and relaxing, and it gives me options too about, I may want to not have such dense stitching and have my stitches spaced apart. So I have that option of not coming back in the other direction. This is just kind of a method I've developed that works well for me. I'm going to be careful here as I go by the claws. I don't want to cover them up. So I'm just going to take tiny stitches around these claws. This thread I'm using was an end left from stitching previously, so it's not very long, so I'm already at the end of it. So I'm just going to pull it to the back and tie off. thread a new piece with 2 strands and continue stitching. When it comes to color, because I've chosen floss colors that are all beside each other on the color wheel, I know that they're all going to go together. So I could have chosen any one of these other shades. I'm leaving this one out for now, but I could have chosen any of these colors and they would have gone, they would have matched, they would have looked good. So in terms of why did I choose this one, it's kind of a subjective thing. And you know, the main thing to know is that you kind of can't go wrong. So I could have started stitching with this and decide, well, this is maybe too light, or maybe I want it to be a brighter color or a darker color. And then I would have had these to choose from, and I could add them or change what I'm doing. You know, I'm looking at this and it's blending in really well, and maybe I wanted a bit more of a contrast. So if I wanted more of a contrast, I could choose that, and I probably will bring this in. So it's really about also what your goals are. And here my goal here is to secure the edge of this fabric down, and I think I'm wanting it to blend in and not stand out. So this color is working really well to serve that purpose. I could also take this color and go up here and stitch this little bit that's not stitched down, this patch of fabric. And that kind of blends it with the other piece of fabric. These two both have this same color now, so it's blending them. So if that's a goal, that's going to be something that's a good idea to do. And now I'm going to just take this down to the end and put a few more stitches in. And because I stitched down here, I'm going to take this up on the other side of this fabric, which is right at the edge of my felt. So I'm going to be aware of where the edge of my felt is. And I'm going to stitch up this line. So now I'm going to stitch this patch, and I'm going to go for the next darker color. And the reason I'm doing that is so I'm not using the same color, for sure. That's one of the reasons. And also because this patch is lighter than the other colors, and it has white, making it even lighter. So the blue green color is light and the white is light. So I thought picking a darker shade will help balance it with the rest of the colors in the piece. So I've surrounded this piece of fabric in this darker tone, or a medium tone, and I'm liking the way that that looks. It shows up really well, but it's also blending. So I think what I want to do now is I want to add more of this color in this blue area. And what that's going to do is it's going to tone down the blue and make it more green. It's going to bring out the green tones. This color blue actually is a mixture of blue and yellow, so it's got green in it. And so adding more of a green shade, a blue-green shade, is going to bring out the greenness of this blue and tone down the blueness of the blue. So in a nutshell, it's about blending, and what I'm doing is adding green everywhere. And this is the color that I'm using, this mid tone of the 3 that I'm using. And so after I've added this mid-tone, then I can see what I think of the effect that it's had and decide if I want to add some lighter green or darker green, or even a green that has much more yellow in it that's much brighter. So after taking some stitches across the piece with this color, one of the things that I find interesting is that there's a slight difference in the way the color is showing up. And that's one of the mysterious and wonderful things about color is that it reacts to the colors around it. You can even see that to an extent here with this lighter color, how different it looks up against these two pieces of fabric. So a lot of times you might pick a color and think it's going to look one way, but it looks slightly different when you put it down. And so what you can do is make decisions about your next color based on that. So what I might decide is that this color, while it looks really nice, it's maybe lighter than I wanted. And so I could come in with a darker shade and put that in and see how the two react with each other and see how they look up against this color. So these are the kinds of decisions that you can make in terms of color as you go along. So I've added a few stitches in this darker color, just a little bit darker than this, and here and here and here, and you can see, and a little bit over here, you can see that it's slightly different and it's showing up in a different way than this lighter color, and it's really adding something. So I'm going to keep playing with these colors. So you can really see how having these two shades has added some interesting depth, and it's brought out the greens that are in this blue, and it's starting to really unite the piece. Now the one color I haven't used is this lighter green color. This is a fairly close match, and so I thought I would bring that color in next. So it exists here on the bottom, so it might be nice to bring it in this upper area. So the options that I have are to add more of the same stitching or to stitch in the other direction just as a contrast. So I think I'm going to start and do some lines in this direction and see how I like it. And I'm going to go through this piece of fabric to try and sort of unify this top area. I'm going to start over here at the edge. Secure my stitching there, and then move across. Now, if I was concerned about having straight lines here, I could use a marking pen and mark the straight lines. I'm going to start by not doing that and see how I like what comes of this sort of freehand approach. I'm going to come up here and continue. One of the things that's really interesting that I can see already is that this color is a green, but because it's so much lighter and it has more yellow in it, it almost is looking like it's the same color as the bird. And if you look at the floss, it's really not. So this is the color I'm stitching with, very different. This is the color that I've stitched the bird. So they're really not the same. But in the background here, that's how it's appearing. I'm going to keep going with these lines. I think it's really interesting how this green is showing up in this part of the piece. It'll be interesting to bring it down here, I think, and see how it changes. And on this side, how it changes against this. So I'm going to add more of these lines. And that's going to marry all these pieces together. So I've moved this stitching down. I just want to point out again that this is green and it's not yellow, and it's just coming across as a matching color to this. So that's just the way the color's working in this situation, and I think it's really nice and really interesting. As far as the stitching goes, I like the texture that it's adding. And I'm going to continue on and add some more stitch. I'm going to switch to a new color now. Because this green is showing up as yellow, I'm going to bring in some of this yellow and see how that plays off against the green. I think what it's going to do is make the green more green by highlighting how it's different from the yellow. So I'm going to put that in a few spots. Just some little touches of yellow have added quite a bit in terms of color, really making the greens look more green. I haven't taken this green all the way to the top. I think what I'm going to do is bring in this lightest color, This is the same color I used here to secure down the patches in these two spots. I'm going to take this up top. So that's going to take this sort of turquoise blue background here, and it's going to blend it more with the rest of the pieces. It's going to accentuate the green tones in it more with this color. That's my goal. And then the other thing I can see from looking at it is I want to bring in this gray-brown color that I had used on the bird. I want to bring that into the piece as well. And that's to bring this color into another place in the piece, as well as it's a very dark color, so it's nice to have dark in more places than just on the bird. So this lightest green blue I've brought from the top all the way to here and brought it through these green stitches. And I think what that's done is really made these stitches more green. And it's also added a lot of texture. So now I'm going to hop down here with this dark color and put it down here. So this has brought some nice weight and color underneath the bird. Now I'm thinking about the edges, and a lot of times I add blanket stitch around the edge of my pieces, and I'm feeling like I want to do that here, and I want to use probably a black. And because there's been a little bit of distorting, and because I cut this piece larger than my felt, I don't have felt that's extending all the way out, but I'm really liking this lighter blue color on the edges. So what I've done is I've cut a piece of felt in black that's exactly the size that this piece is, which is 4 by 4 inches. And what I'm going to do is place my piece on top of that piece of felt, and I'm going to attach it. Then I'm going to be able to go around with blanket stitch without shrinking the piece the way that it would. There would be just a little bit of shrinking if I didn't do this, but with this piece that's just slightly larger than the piece of felt that's on there, I'm going to be able to maintain this size. So now I'm going to stitch on this black and then add some blanket stitch. I'm going to use regular sewing thread and baste this in place. And because I'm using a white thread, I'll be able to see it on the back, and I'll be able to take it out later. So all I've done is gone around with some big stitches on the back and smaller on the front, and now this piece of black felt is attached. So it's made my piece a little bit thicker. You can see a little bit of the black showing through, but I'm not worried about that. I'm going to add my blanket stitch, and then we'll see where I'm at after that. So I'm in the home stretch here, my first round, maybe my only round. Of blanket stitch. So the way I'm doing this is I'm holding the thread to the side, inserting my needle so it's actually coming up inside of a loop here. So I'm holding it here. I go in from the front to the back, and I tighten that loop. I'm using black. I decided to use black because there's black in the bird. And so I've used 2 strands of embroidery floss throughout this. And the way to connect this to the very beginning, I'll show how I do that. So 1 more stitch is needed to get to where I started. So I take my final stitch exactly the same way. And then, especially if it's going to show, you should do this. This probably won't show if I didn't do it because I'm on black, but then I just take my needle and go through the initial stitch here, through that little loop that exists. So now everything's connected. And then I take my thread to the back and I tie a knot. And then I can cut my thread. So here's my first round, and that black piece of felt that I added has worked out really well. These edges haven't curled under or flattened with my stitching. They're staying sort of raw and unraveled, which I really like. And I've been able to keep the size that I want of this 4x4 square. So in terms of color and building the color of this piece, I came to a point where I felt like I wanted to have this black border put around in the blanket stitch in order for me to decide where to go next with color. So of course, this step would be a nice thing to do at the end because it's going to cover up all my stitching depending on what I want to do with this piece. But that wasn't really a concern for me. My biggest concern is just to continue to react to each new thing that I add that gives me an idea for the next thing. So what I'm thinking now is about this orangey brown color that is in the beak and in the feet, and it's nowhere else. And remember when we were looking at the color wheel, here it is. Here's this color that's in the piece, the least of all the colors, because I've put the yellow green in the stitching, and it's also in this piece of fabric. The yellow's in the bird, and then the green and blue-green is kind of all over. So I want to bring this color in. So the choice I have really is to use this same color, or I could go a shade darker, like it suggests the different colors here, a brown orange that's deeper than this. So here's an example of a color that's a darker shade, this sort of orangey brown color. So this would be a nice color to bring in. And it's going to contrast because when you look at the color wheel, it's the farthest away from the main colors, which are sort of these blue, greens, and greens. So that's going to be something that's nice to bring in. So I'm going to take this color, put this one aside, and I'm going to add this in a few spots around the piece. You can see what a nice pop this is giving the piece. It's a nice bright brown orange color. And it's bringing to life the green colors around it too. So I'm going to keep going here. And I'm going to add this in a couple more spots. I'm really liking what it's adding. And the color is right in this yellow-orange family. So these little pops of this darker color really adding a lot. It's really only in a few places, but it's bringing out the other colors too and making them more distinct and helping them to shine. So I've added a bit more stitching on the sides too, just to bring that color in. And I think that that's unifying the piece even more. So I think what I want to do now is I want to bring some of the blue-green color in. And I think I'm going to choose the darkest shade. So here's the darkest shade. So it's close to these dark stripes here. And I want to bring some of that in to the edge as well. So I'm going to do some blanket stitching in a few spots, add that. Then I'm going to look at it and see if I want to add more black after that, depending on how I feel like it's blending. But I'm really happy with where it's at, and I feel like it's really coming to the spot where it's almost finished. The other thing I'm going to do now, as I stitched, I came across a couple of spots where I was seeing my basting stitches, and so I snipped some of those areas so I wouldn't stitch over them. So I'm just going to take out the remaining basting stitches because I don't need them anymore. And to do that, I'm just going to use the back of my needle either on the back or the front if I see a stitch, and I'm going to use my scissors to cut where necessary. So I took that darker green color and I moved it all the way around from here to here. I skipped the parts that had this orangey brown color, but everywhere else I added the green, and I really like what that's added. The other thing that's happened because of adding this black felt is that this piece is quite puffy and it feels really nice in the hand. I'm really happy with this and I feel like it's almost finished. One thing I'm thinking about is adding one other tiny piece of patchwork. This is the same fabric that's here. I was feeling like I wanted something up in this area. I feel like it needs something up here to balance it out. So I'm going to have to add some stitching, some of this same stitching that's underneath. Try and add those colors back in to integrate this. And what that will do will make it look like it's been there the entire time. So this piece is integrated and I'm thinking of adding one more piece. So I'm looking at this piece and I'm feeling like it's finished. It has so much stitching on it and so much texture. I feel like in terms of color, I've really told a nice story. I've moved the color around. I've unified all the different pieces of fabric, and so it's done. So I have a 5x5 canvas that I've painted black, and I'm going to attach it, just like I've done in several of my other videos. I'm going to adhere it with a matte medium. I'm going to press it under a heavy book overnight, and then it's going to be finished. And so here it is. It's attached to the canvas. I've signed the back. It's full of harmonious color, lots of texture, and of course, a beautiful American goldfinch. I hope you found the discussion of color interesting and informative. I hope it helps you in your stitching projects and that you're able to use the tips here to create a piece that you're really happy with in terms of stitching, in terms of color, and of course, whatever subject matter it is that speaks to you. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, happy stitching.